Hello, and welcome to another video from 3.5 Archive. Today we're going to be doing our 73rd D&D 3.5 Prestige class review. And we're going to be looking at the Frenzied Berserker from the Complete Warrior Sourcebook. This is a big one. The Frenzied Berserker is a very popular, very well-loved, but also much feared Prestige class for barbarians in D&D. Frenzied Berserkers basically let themselves be completely absorbed by the battle rage that most barbarians use to slay their foes, and as such they gain extreme ability to deal damage in melee combat, but they also find themselves so lost in their rage that they occasionally turn on their allies. Frenzied Berserker is possibly the most iconic Prestige class for a barbarian in D&D 3.5, but at the same time, it's hard to justify taking it due to how volatile its abilities are. Let's take a look at the Frenzied Berserker, what it requires, what it gives you, and if it's worth taking this very dangerous, literally double-edged sword of a Prestige class. So, what do you need to become a Frenzied Berserker? Well, you're going to need to be of non-lawful alignment, you need a +6 base attack bonus, and you're going to need the feats Cleave, Destructive Rage, Intimidating Rage, and Power Attack. The non-lawful requirement for this Prestige class is a little bit redundant because to get the rage feats the Prestige class asks for, you're going to have to be a barbarian, and barbarians can't be non-lawful anyway. But aside from that, the requirements for this Prestige class are fairly restrictive. Cleave is not going to be one that you're going to always take as a barbarian, although some will take it anyway to be more efficient at disposing of low-level foes. Destructive Rage helps you break stuff, and you're probably not going to take it that often except to get into this Prestige class. Intimidating Rage is a good option anyway. It lets you, as a free action, attempt to make a foe shaken when you enter your rage, once per encounter, which is nice. And Power Attack you're going to take anyway, but this Prestige class is still asking you to take 3, maybe 2.5 feats that you wouldn't have otherwise taken on average. So, to get into this Prestige class is fairly restrictive. I mean, if you're going into this with 6 levels of Barbarian, you're going to have to play a human. Otherwise, you're going to have to take a level of Fighter to get a bonus feat to get that last feat. And you're going to have no room to spare, so any variance in your character build, you're going to have to wait until later to take other feats that you might want. So the Frenzied Berserker is pretty restrictive to get into. We'll see if it pays off for that. As for your stats, they're pretty much identical to a Barbarian. You're going to get a full base attack bonus, 2+ intelligence modifier skill points per level, so a little bit less in the skill point department. You're going to get a good fortitude save and a d12 hit die, so pretty much the same as a Barbarian. You get a small boost to your fortitude saves from the general effects of multi-classing, but that's about it. And then at level 1, you get the Frenzy feature. This is like a Rage. You can enter it during combat, and while you're frenzied, you get a +6 bonus to Strength, and an extra attack per round while using the full attack action. This doesn't stack with haste, so the party wizard or bard giving you haste isn't going to help you out, but still getting a +6 to Strength and a free extra attack is going to be superior to a Rage. The downside is that you get a -4 penalty to armor class instead of a -2, and you get 2 points of non-lethal damage per round that you are in your frenzy. Which sounds really bad, but you're going to have a ton of hit points as a barbarian with presumably good constitution, so odds are you're going to kill all of your opponents before you take too much damage from that. And arguably you'll take a lot less damage from your foes, killing them faster than this non-lethal damage would do to you. The real downside to this is that you need to make a DC 20 will save in order to end the frenzy before its normal duration, which is the same as that of a Rage. And that's going to usually be at least, 5 or 6 rounds. And usually most combats will be over after 2 or 3 rounds, possibly even just 1 if a Frenzied Berserker is getting into melee. So that's going to be several rounds that the Frenzied Berserker is still going to be in their frenzy, and unlike a Rage, if a Frenzied Berserker runs out of enemies to attack, they're going to start attacking their allies. To quote from the book, you then attack the nearest creature if you run out of foes. You then attack the nearest creature, determine randomly if several potential foes are equidistant, and fight that opponent without regard to friendship, innocence, or health, the target's or her own. So a Frenzied Berserker is a ticking time bomb, and it's even more so the case because if a Frenzied Berserker is dealt damage, they might just enter their frenzy automatically. They have to make a will save of 10 plus the damage taken since their last action to avoid just flying into a frenzy anyway. So you can't even necessarily control when you go into your battle frenzy. So this is a very dangerous prestige class. While you are extremely effective in melee combat, and you presumably can enter a frenzy while you are also in a rage, you don't get as much control over this as you do over your rage. And even worse, there are other features this prestige class gets that make it actually worth taking, but you can't just skip over the frenzy feature. Oddly enough, ironically enough perhaps, the Frenzied Berserker would be improved by deleting the frenzy feature from it entirely in some ways. But it is, again, a double-edged sword, and it makes the prestige class a lot more compelling of a choice rather than just being a straight upgrade to the Barbarian. So there are ways to design a party that can work with the Frenzied Berserker, but it's going to require a bunch of characters either with, flying carpets and being wizards and range attackers that just fly above out of the Frenzied Berserker's reach, or they are going to have some reliable way of either giving the Frenzied Berserker an extreme bonus on saving throws, having some magic item that can do calm emotions, of which there are several, or some other sort of effect where they can easily paralyze the Frenzied Berserker and prevent them from attacking. So if you have an enchanter in the party with an extremely good, with all the spell focus enchantment, greater spell focus enchantment, and a variety of other ways to do hold person, then you could do that on them. It's questionable whether a Frenzied Berserker in their frenzy still can see their allies as allies, or if they are just so enraged that they attack their allies despite knowing that they are allies. If that were the case, then your ability to voluntarily fail a saving throw could come into effect, and a Frenzied Berserker could, just choose to fail a save against a hold person and stay paralyzed until their frenzy effect ends. But that really doesn't seem to be the way the rules are written or intended. So if your Dungeon Master is nice to you and lets that work, or has some other sort of workaround for this that you enable, then it can be okay, but otherwise you're going to really risk your own party getting killed by the frenzy ability. So this is, probably the most complicated feature of the Frenzied Berserker. It's the one that requires the most discussion, but that's because you need to look into ways to mitigate this ability as much as ways to use it. So let's continue looking at this prestige class and see if it's worth the risk of letting a party member take levels in Frenzied Berserker. At level 1, you also get the Die Hard feat as a bonus feat, even if you don't meet the prerequisites. That's a nice one. Most people don't want to take Die Hard because you have to take Endurance first. Maybe some Rangers might take it, but Die Hard is one of those feats that you don't want to have because you don't want to have to use it, and it's a lot better for NPCs and the like to make a more interesting encounter. It's a decent feat. It might come in handy sometimes, but you don't want it to come in handy. You're going to get, at level 2, Supreme Cleave. This lets you take a 5-foot step between attacks when using the Cleave or Great Cleave feat. You're still limited to one 5-foot step per round, but this can let you get a few more foes with your Cleave and hit enemies that you otherwise wouldn't be able to. If this is the reason why this prestige class required the Cleave feat, then it's not very good. Cleave doesn't come up that often anyway, so having some sort of improvement to it will give it a little bit of a benefit, but not enough that you would want to keep it around if it was the choice between having this feature and the Cleave prerequisite and not having this feature and having one less feat that you have to take to get into the Frenzied Berserker. Still, it's nice sometimes, and it's a decent level 2 feature, although getting the Frenzy at level 1 is obviously much more important. At level 3, you're going to get your second use per day of Frenzy. That's if the first use didn't already wipe out the entire rest of your party. At level 4, you're going to get Deathless Frenzy. This is going to let you scorn death and unconsciousness while you're in a frenzy, and as long as your frenzy continues, you are not treated as disabled at 0 hit points, nor as dying at -1 to -9 hit points. Even if you drop to -10 where you'd normally be dead, you keep fighting until your frenzy ends, at which point, if you're still below -10, then you'll just die. This ability doesn't stop you from dying from massive damage or from spell effects like Slay Living or Disintegrate. So if you're hit with a Disintegrate and drop below -10, you just get disintegrated. This doesn't stop that from happening to you. This is really good, obviously, because if you are in against overwhelming odds for some reason, you can just keep fighting for at least 5 rounds, with which, if you have Cleave or Great Cleave, you could kill hundreds more foes than you otherwise would be able to, assuming you're in some kind of mass battle or something like that. If you're up against a foe that you normally could not beat, this could potentially double or even triple your hit points by some guesses or estimates. So this is an extremely powerful feature in the right circumstances, but you're going to have to be going up against enemies a lot higher level than you in order for this to really come up a whole lot. And again, it's looking more and more like this prestige class is better for a solo campaign. So maybe that's where you would want to use it. Still, we have to look at the downside where if you don't manage to heal yourself back up by the time this frenzy ends, then you're just going to die. And given that the party cleric probably doesn't want to get anywhere near you while you're in your frenzy to heal you, you're probably going to die if this feature plays out. So Deathless Frenzy really isn't as good as it looks, especially more as a consequence of the frenzy feature alongside it, but even just as is, it's like Die Hard. You don't want to have to need this sort of feature. If you are needing it, it's because you screwed up somewhere along the line. At level 5, you're going to get 3 uses of Frenzy per day, and you're also going to get improved power attack. And this is where the Prestige class really starts to shine. This is going to give you a +3 on your melee damage rolls for every -2 that you take on your melee attack rolls with the power attack feat, or +3 for every -1 when we're wielding a two-handed weapon. So this just straight up improves power attack. It doesn't stack with normal effects of power attack, of course, it's a modification to it. So when you take a -1 with your greatsword, you get +3 to damage, and if you take a -2, you get +6, -3 for +9, and so on. And that's really good because power attacking is one of sort of the core features of D&D 3.5 melee combat, and getting to get ahead on that is something that pretty much no other prestige class or feat or option gives you. This is a unique feature, and unfortunately it's locked behind a very volatile and potentially catastrophic for your own party prestige class. But anyway, moving on, at level 6 you're going to get Inspire Frenzy once per day. This allows you to inspire frenzy in your allies while you yourself are frenzied. And when you use this ability, any willing allies within 10 feet of you get the benefits and disadvantages of frenzies if you had that ability, they had that ability themselves. And it works pretty much the same way, regardless of whether they remain within 10 feet of you, and you get more uses of this per day at higher levels. So I suppose you could magnify the downside of the frenzy ability by having all of your allies become capable of killing each other. This seems like a cool feature, but really for a party that wants to survive past one encounter, it really isn't. This might be good for a very challenging battle with a group of orcs that have a Frenzied Berserker leading them, but those orcs would have to be suicidal in order to want to follow that character and take on the Inspire Frenzy benefits. And then at level 7, you are going to get your 4th use of Frenzy per day. At level 8, you're going to get a 2nd use of Inspire Frenzy per day, and you're also going to get Greater Frenzy. This makes your bonus to strength during a frenzy +10 instead of +6, so that's a major benefit to it. And then at level 9, you're going to get a 5th use of Frenzy per day. And then at 10th level, you're also going to get Tireless Frenzy, which means you're no longer fatigued, although you still take the non-lethal damage for each round it lasted. And this is nice, but it works just like the Barbarian feature, and since it only goes to the end of the encounter anyway, it's barely ever going to come up. Fortunately, you also get Supreme Power Attack at level 10, which now gives you a +2 in melee damage rolls for every -1 you take on your melee attack rolls when you use Power Attack, or if you're using a two-handed weapon, which you probably will be, a +4 for every -1 penalty. This doubles the usefulness of Power Attack, and that is extremely good. Pairing this with some charging builds or anything using the Shock Trooper tactical feat, this can really just launch your damage potential into the stratosphere. Used alongside your Greater Frenzy, you're going to be easily capable of deleting monsters off the battle map in a single round. However, the problem remains that you are still going to have to deal with the downsides of Frenzy. Now, at such a high level, you'll be level 16 by this point. Having the rest of the party flying all the time isn't out of the question, but if you're looking at a standard four character party composition of a fighter, in this case the Frenzied Berserker, a rogue, a cleric, and a wizard, the wizard and cleric can be making ranged attacks with their spells, making ranged spell effects. The rogue oftentimes will want to be in melee to get the most use out of their sneak attack. But even if you have an archer character as that 4th character, you're still going to have to deal with a lot of situations where your group is going to have to be flying, and if they're in close quarters or a room with low ceilings, then they're going to have to stay way away from the Frenzied Berserker. The best strategy with a Frenzied Berserker would be to lock them in a room with the monsters after buffing them and just let them annihilate everything inside, count to 30 or 60 or however long their rage lasts, and then open the door and see what's left. And that's really not going to be fun for the rest of the party. The Frenzied Berserker is a really cool concept, but it's just hard to get past the downside that it presents. And while you can build a party around this, if your character requires the rest of the party to modify their character builds to fit your character, then that's just not going to be very polite or very considerate of the other players in the group. So there's a little bit of a, player and group cohesion issue here to look at with this prestige class. But it certainly is extremely powerful, and it definitely does deserve its reputation as the most destructive option available for barbarians prestige class-wise. So overall, the Frenzied Berserker gets 3 stars for concept and 3 stars for execution. It would get 5 stars for its features, but it gets 1 star for its downside, and that drags it to an average of 3. This is one where you definitely have to modify the party to fit the character. And even if you had a party of all Frenzied Berserkers, they would just end up killing each other fairly quickly. If this prestige class gave you a good will save, it could maybe be seen as a little bit more tolerable, but given that you're going to need to give up all of your feats just to get into it, and that's going to leave nothing for even an Iron Will in your feat slot, it's very difficult to justify taking levels in this prestige class in a party that's not very well prepared for it and very willing to deal with its downsides. So that'll be about it for this D&D 3.5 prestige class review. Please like, share, comment, subscribe, and so on. Thanks for watching, and I will see you next time here on 3.5 Archive.